Folks, welcome back to Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan. I hope you've had a nice break from me. Mr. Trump, or President Trump, has reiterated what I've said for decades. Well, more than 50 years. Let me explain that. You see, years ago, 1969, I joined Ford Foundation. I was based in Raipur, which is now in Chhattisgarh. I did something, and finally I got transferred back to Delhi office. And that was probably the biggest mistake they ever made. Why? 1970 was a landmark year in my development. Because once I got to Delhi, the things I had learnt in Raipur and Chhattisgarh began to take shape. Why, for instance? New high-yielding varieties of paddy. They were not working. People were not getting the sort of results they should have been getting. All the research institute would get 6.5, maybe 7.5 tons per hectare in terms of yield. But most farmers are only getting 4.5 to 5 tons. Even though they applied all the recommended practices, 2 inches of water, 150-50 NPK, but still they weren't getting the yields. And then the first clue emerged when I saw some of these district varietal trials. The results showed, for instance, one almost a side issue. It said the age of seedlings at transplanting paddy. Now, most of the time, they use transplanting to save water. We need about 3 weeks less water in the entire field. You just need it in a small patch. I had a look at these, and something very strange occurred. The recommended age at which seedlings should have been transplanted gave the lowest yields. I said, how could this be possible? If they were younger seedlings, they still gave much higher yields. 18 to 25 days is what they recommended, and that gave the lowest yield. I mean, it was like this. That was strange, I thought. And sure enough, when I went there and found out, it was true. That started opening things in my mind. And I started going through all the literature in their libraries and so on, which I could find. When I pointed this out to my father, and he knew M.S. Swaminathan, and he asked me to go and meet him. And of course, M.S. Swaminathan wouldn't let me say anything. He just started dictating to me, here, run along, take this piece of paper, we know what we're doing. Now that was the one piece of paper he should not have given me. Why? There was the evidence. And when I pointed this out, and it struck me at about 2 in the morning, I sat up bolt upright, because this thing had been lying by my bedside. And there it was. The recommendations for growing these varieties were wrong. All the research institute, starting from the International Rice Research Institute in the Philippines to everyone in this country, all made the same recommendation. So much nitrogen, so much phosphorus, and so much potassium. So I asked them, a whole lot of people, especially in the Ford Foundation, these so-called experts, if you're going to give a blanket recommendation for everybody, why do you need soil testing labs? It's a waste of time, effort, and money. Why do you do it? He said, no, 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 it's necessary. How will you know? It's not scientific to do it any other way. And then he said, when I told them, look, these recommendations are wrong, they had a shock. As a meeting of all of them, they said, well, it needs a lot of experimentation to find out. I said, why? What I've said is true. It's there staring you in the face. And what was that? You see, most farmers had the same type of soil which has been farmed for decades, if not centuries. It was so poor that when you applied the entire recommended dose of fertilizers, you got a yield of 4.5 to 5 tons a hectare. Whereas all your research institutes were showing they get between 7, 8, 10, sometimes 12 tons a hectare in terms of yield, using the same recommendations. But they'd missed out one basic observation. You see, the soil test results showed that their institute soil was so rich, it was producing in the control plot a yield of 6.6 tons per hectare without you applying any nitrogen. Whereas farmers' fields, they weren't even getting this sort of yield after applying the NPK dosage which was recommended. So you got a natural distribution curve. On rich soils, you got a high yield. On poor soil, you got a much lower yield. So where's the sense in doing soil testing if you're not going to change your recommendations depending on the soil test? This information is what sparked me off. Because this had proven the great M.S. Swaminathan was totally wrong. He had endorsed the recommendations and said, no, this is okay, this is very good. How? The evidence was there in front of you. That started off a chain reaction in my mind, and it continues to this day. As a scientist, it is your job to question everything. Even if it's been used for 20 or 30 or 50 years, relook at it. A bit later on, for instance, I found one of the fertilizers we've been using in this country was destroying the soil. You won't believe it? It was what is known as single superphosphate. A soil with a pH of 6 in 10 years or 15 years would come down to a pH of 3, highly acid soil. And it was this single superphosphate. I put this down in my book, but who wants to listen? Now, this is precisely what all these American agencies play on. They bring up little idiots, back them into becoming demigods, and whatever they want done will be done through them. My hands are clean, we done nothing. See, they have said so. I know for a fact M.S. Swaminathan is highly favoured by the Ford Foundation. Remember the moment he retired as, I think, Secretary for Agriculture or what have you, he got a plum job in the International Rice Research in the Philippines as a director. And then, of course, he was made. What was he trying to do? Well, one of his great rivals at the time, one Dr. Acharya, who was based in the Indian Rice Research Institute in, I think, Cuttack, He had collected a gene pool of all the rice varieties in this country. The Ford Foundation kept saying this belongs to the world, it should be kept in the Philippines. And the moment M.S. Swaminathan went there, the first thing he did was had this transferred to the Philippines, from where it went to the US. And what do you think they did with it? They used that gene pool to create a series of basmati varieties and patented it as if they were the inventors of basmati rice. Of course, the rice grows in Punjab and UP and such places, and in Pakistan and in northern India. We're a bunch of idiots. We didn't know. I mean, this was basmati rice, we didn't know. And yet we've been growing it for centuries. Well, the government of India finally got its act together and got that patent rescinded. Now, this is the background which made me suspect, not just today, but 55 years ago, 1970, what the American organizations were up to. And what I found, oh brother, make your hair curl. All these so-called philanthropic organizations were always a part and parcel of the CIA's activities. Not just the Ford Foundation, not just Rockefeller Foundation, but ActionAid, Amnesty International, who else? Yes. And now, as per Donald Trump, USAID or USAID. World Bank, same thing. You see, it doesn't matter what or who that organization is. The moment it begins to spread its wings anywhere, the CIA gets involved and starts using these people by infiltrating through their operatives. Now, their modus operandi, even in those days, 55 years ago, and it still happens today, it's not blatant and out in the open, no. You see, the Ford Foundation, for instance, had a whole lot of so-called experts in agriculture. Experts with no knowledge. I, as a newcomer back in this country in 1968, seem to have learnt more in 2 years than they ever knew in their lives. And those guys were experts. Wow. Now, their way of doing things was they would embed them, go into various ministries, whether it was family planning, town and city planning, agriculture, animal husbandry, wherever they had an interest in destroying things, transport, extension, especially agricultural extension, because while I was there, do you know what their basic thing was? What they were trying to get into us? The American way of extension should be plonked on us, and we should adopt that. Until you tell them, well, look, it doesn't work here. Things are different here. How do you tell people who are illiterate what to do? For instance, they said, send all these recommendations in fertilizer bags. To whom? To people who can't read? So what use is that? Now, having sent these guys and embedded them in those departments, those government departments, they were the advisors who would develop their own coteries. Anything the CIA wanted done would be done, passed on to these guys, and they would tell their coterie what to do, and it would be done. Because the attitude even then was, well, foreign experts have said this. It must be correct. They wouldn't just say this. Now, how do they build people up? Well, the usual: money, cars, air conditioners in those days were a prized commodity, foreign trips, foreign shopping trips for them and their families, awards for which they were thoroughly unsuitable. For instance, I'll tell you, Dr. Kurian got a Max Essay Award in the 60s. Why? He wasn't even the originator of the Amul system. And the man who really did was a forgotten man of the milk industry. He got a Max Essay Award around 1992 or 93. His name was T.K. Patel, Tribhuvandas Kaka Patel, who started Amul in 1946. And any recognition he had to wait until 1990. And here's the best part. Kurian became known as the god of the milk industry. Why? Now, I first met him in 1968, briefly. I was the only one staying at Amul Guest House, so he had 2 or 3 people with him. Join us for dinner. I said, okay. And who was at dinner? Dr. Kurian, Michael Hals, well known in the milk industry, but always in the background. What is his background? Would you believe? Pre-1960, he used to be the Ford Foundation representative, the head of our mission in Myanmar, or Burma as it was then. That office was closed down. This guy came into Delhi office. Now remember, he was still on the payroll of Ford Foundation, but seconded out to Baroda, or Vadodara as it is today, the CMPO, City Municipal Planning Organization. What was he doing with Dr. Kurian? And the moment they sat down, and the 4th person there was Dr. Amrita Patel. You heard those names before. And Kurian says, I know nothing about milk production or processing. I thought, that's strange. A man who's been general manager of Amul for 10 years knows nothing about milk processing. And within half a minute of that, Michael Hals says he knows even less about milk processing or milk production. And these two were the gods of the milk industry. Now you understand what I mean. Somebody being embedded to become the right hand of somebody who is even bigger. What shall I call him? Well, you understand what I mean. And these two, people who know nothing about milk production or processing, are the gods of the milk industry. Their contribution. What was it? Now you understand why in 1976 and 77, when I said, look, milk in Anand used to cost 1 rupee 50 paisa a litre. And I said, the way things are going here, one of these days it's going to cost over 50 rupees a litre. It's happening now. In fact, it got to 40 rupees a litre 10 years ago. Why? Because of the overheads built into the system. Now you understand why and how these organizations, they embed their own trained staff in these places, and you don't even realize they're there. Because the decisions are being made by local people, Indians, Indian officials, who have been brainwashed by these guys to accept them as their gods. This is how they've been working. whether it's Dr. Kurian or Dr. M.S. Swaminathan. Just think, only two people have ever been given the World Food Prize. B. Kurian, M.S. Swaminathan. Why? None of them ever earned it. The work was done by a whole lot of other people. Where are their names? Like Mr. Kejriwal, 2004 was it or 2006? Magsaysay Award. Why? What has he done that is so wonderful? There are thousands of other, millions of other NGOs all over the place who've done an even better job. What about them? No mention. Kejriwal, Magsaysay Award. Supported, funded by the Ford Foundation since the year 2000. Why? Build him up as a future Chief Minister and Prime Minister. Now you understand Rahul Gandhi, why he's being pushed by the deep state and so on. Because he is an idiot and he will be their chamcha. In fact, Rahul Gandhi goes there and said, why don't you intervene? Intervene in India? Why? Apart from these that I mentioned, such organizations, there are so many other, all these NGOs. There's another party that comes in for finance and so on, for the same purpose, George Soros and his Open Society Foundation. Now you think of the connections they have. People like Amartya Sen, Nobel laureate. Bangladesh, Muhammad Yunus, Nobel laureate. Great friend of Hillary Clinton and George Soros and so on. Why? To turn Bangladesh and India into an Indian colony. To be totally subservient to American needs. And they use any way, all these NGOs, they use to spread disinformation. Disinformation has been going on since the 50s. I don't know how many of you will remember in the old days, the 50s and 60s, Voice of America, a radio station, a network of radio stations all over the Middle East, all over the borders of Eastern Europe and Western Europe. Why? Disinformation. To tell everybody in the Soviet Union, the West is great, Russian, Soviet Union, communism, no good. The strange thing is, communist governments like China have overtaken the USA and they're hopping mad about it. Now I've told you also, they use blackmail and things like this. Well, Mr. Donald Trump, President Trump has proved that. He has proven it. You first give them a lot of weaponry, as the Biden government gave to, presidency gave to Zelensky in Ukraine, to start that war. Egg them on, we will support you all the way. And now President Trump says, either you give us this, Ukraine, or we stop giving you weapons. Classic blackmail. That is why we never bought, or very few things were bought from the US. Because they may sell us 10 aircraft. But when we need spare parts for them, they hold back. Give us this, and this, or we won't give you any spare part, so your 10 aircraft or fighters will be of no use. More blackmail? What else would you call it? Now this is what is the sort of pattern which decided Indian policy throughout the 50s, the 60s and the 70s, and even the 80s and 90s. It is only now that India is beginning to stand up and say, no, we would like to do things our way for our benefit, not for your benefit. Something I realized by 1970. All these IITs, for instance, they were set up with American aid, yes. Kanpur is totally Ford Foundation funded. But their graduates were never intended for employment in India. It was their way of training Indian brains in India at our expense for the American job market. And you see how successful that policy has been. So many of the American multinationals are now headed by Indians or PIOs or OCIs. Now you begin to understand their entire project. And now President Trump says, gold visas. You invest 5 million there, you get American citizenship. Why? Because the people there do not have the money for education. If they had, they would never be here looking for talent. Now I know Donald Trump says illegal migrants are a menace. They are anywhere. But what is America? All your people there, except the Native Americans, are immigrants or migrants. Most of them who came in without any sort of authority to do so, without any visas or anything. So what is America without migrants? Nothing. And they call us savages. What did they do to the American Indian? What are they doing to to the Palestinians in Palestine? See, the Americans have one other, how shall I put it? I wouldn't call it a quality because it's not a desirable trait. They make treaties with different people which they have absolutely no intention of keeping. In fact, every treaty they've ever made with the American Indian, they only kept one. They only kept one promise they made to them, that we will take your land. And they did. Every other treaty they broke within a few months, if that. And here's the latest example: weapons for rare earths. Now you understand what I said in one of the earlier ones. Is Rahul Gandhi a foreign spy or foreign agent? He doesn't give a damn about the people of India. He never did. Their entire family never cared. To them, India was their personal fief or colony. And they were the colonists. These are the sort of people the CIA looks for. 2 years ago, in January, Victoria Nuland had a long chat with M.K. Stalin. He had another long chat with Rahul Gandhi. Rahul Gandhi has met people like Donald Lu and Victoria Nuland. And in Uzbekistan, he met something called, what's his name? Samantha Powers. All these are Assistant Secretaries of State in the US government. What were they responsible for? Regime change. Victoria Nuland already proven in Ukraine. Donald Lu, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Either you give us this or we will create a revolution. Give us this or we will be deposed. And they keep doing it. So it's not just every foreign NGO, the money that comes in to help, to fund local NGOs in exchange for doing their work. and how intertwined they are in our system. One of these so-called NGOs was the Center for Policy Research in Delhi. Who was head of that until last year? Yamini Iyer. I believe she's also the daughter of Mani Shankar Iyer. When this whole thing blew over, of course she resigned quickly. You see, Open Society Foundation and Rahul Gandhi goes around with all these people who are totally against the nation of India. And of course Rahul Gandhi doesn't even believe we are a nation. They're on the lookout for such people. They build them up as demigods, and then they put them in charge here. They're the puppets, and the puppet masters are sitting in the UK or US or some such place. Like your George Soros, the CIA, Deepstate, and a whole lot of others. Now, I mentioned Amartya Sen in passing for a reason. See, Amartya Sen himself, what did he get a Nobel Prize for? Okay. He doesn't himself inspire a great deal of confidence in anything. But how many people know what was his wife prior to becoming Mrs. Amartya Sen? What was her name? Emma Georgina Rothschild. Remember what I've talked about in many other videos? The Rothschild family, the Rothschild imprint. They're not in front, but pulling the strings from behind the scenes. And this is what the CIA does. George Soros, the CIA, almost owned the Democrat Party in the USA. Heavily supported by George Soros. Why? Because first they want to take over the USA, and they're almost 2/3 of the way there. From the USA, they want to rule the world, one government, or the New World Order, which is a very, very nasty and dangerous thing. It means no room for freedom, and they're the ones who keep saying, the land of the free. If you remember my video on Ukraine, and I said, to the American way of thinking, do understand this. The only time you are free is when you're under the American jackboot. Then they say you're free. What the hell? Do they know what the word freedom means? Or do they think they own the world already? Well, maybe the Rothschilds do, a large chunk of it. And remember one thing always. Who is devaluing the Indian rupee vis-a-vis the dollar, US dollar? There can only be one. The hidden hand at the back. Rothschilds. Why? The first of the Rothschilds, Mayor Amschel Rothschild, do you know what his axiom was, his way of life was? His belief was this: give me the power over a nation's money, and I care not who makes its laws. And he's proving it even today. We don't like it, but we don't realize it's happening because the Rothschild name doesn't appear anywhere. And yet it's there. As I said, Mrs. Amartya Sen, who's on the advisory panel of Open Society Foundation, along with her husband Amartya Sen. Remember the same Amartya Sen, Manmohan Singh had invited him to take over and make a go of Nalanda University, take it back to its former glory? Same one. Now you begin to understand the connection. Manmohan Singh, George Soros, Rahul Gandhi, Sonia Gandhi, and the Rothschilds. So you see, all these are in the background. This is the Rothschild pattern or the Rothschild plan. Your name never appears in front. It's always in the background. And they're the ones who are pulling the strings and everybody else is dancing. Now you understand how the CIA works. It embeds its own all over the place. Advisors. And if you look around, you'll find them all over the world. Different names, different titles, different NGOs, different philanthropic organizations. But they're all doing the same thing. And where there are Americans, unfortunately, you can't trust them. I found that out from 1970 onwards. They have been spreading disinformation since 1950s that I know of. Voice of America, remember those radio stations? Because most East European countries didn't have TV then. Then, of course, they found that wasn't working too well. So, philanthropy, so-called, infiltrate all these organizations. And here's the best part of it. Nehru had invited the Ford Foundation to come into India as honored guests, almost diplomatic status. They paid no taxes here. They had much cheaper petrol because they didn't pay those taxes. The taxes were reclaimed. They could shop at the US commissary. Now you begin to understand the entire network that's spread all over the country. And this, as I've said, not just here, even in so-called friendly countries like Western Europe. The Chinese isolated themselves to protect themselves against this sort of rubbish. Now, of course, as they opened up, they're open to all this. But the Chinese, on the other hand, remember one thing about them. They find somebody, take him out, try him, sentence him, and sentence is carried out within a matter of days. It doesn't take 20 years to try a person, another 5 or 10 years to carry out the sentence. With them, you find somebody, you try him immediately, sentence carried out within a matter of days. And there's no sort of appeal. Maybe we have to adopt that. See, the Americans, unfortunately, they claim they're enemies of communism, and yet they're driving all of us into that net. Funny, strange. Whatever they do has the opposite effect. And yet, when they start taking over countries, people there don't like it. And they do rise up against it. This is, how shall I put it, a normal, common intention of most people. To rise up against anybody impinging on their freedom. It's not that they like it, they don't. But what do? Now, better stop here. Digest all what I've said. And then you begin to understand. Because the next one will be a follow-up on this. It may be a part 2 and a part 3. But how it has impinged on Indian policies, both agricultural, crop and animal husbandry, plus our industry. I mean, it's mind-boggling. These are things I discovered in the 1970s and realized that. But most people called me an idiot. Now they're beginning to find out. You see, milk and agriculture, for instance, what was their main aim? A, if possible, to stop us becoming self-sufficient. If you can't do that, put such policies in place here so that we cannot compete in terms of price or quality with anybody from outside. Result, milk and cheese and things like this are cheaper in the US or in the UK than they are here. And those foreign companies can come here and compete and leave people like Amul way behind. I mean, a couple of years ago, Amul was actually seeking a subsidy from the government of Gujarat to market skim milk powder outside India at a lower price than in India. I mean, how ridiculous can you get? Why should the taxpayer have to pay you to do that? If you can't compete, don't. Stay home. If you can compete, compete on your own. Why should the poor taxpayer, and take my word for it, everybody pays tax. The moment somebody buys anything in the market, he pays a tax on it. Now, whether it's GST, whether it's sales tax, or whether it's VAT or what have you, he's paying that tax. And that money is going to subsidize these guys? No. I'm sorry, this is not on. Anyway, the next one I'll show you how this is impinged on our policy decisions. How? Because each of those ministers knew less than the other. And most of the staff in those offices were even more ignorant than the ministers. So who was guiding these guys? People like the Ford Foundation, George Soros' Open Society Foundation, the CIA, and these so-called NGOs. And where were their strings being pulled from? The CIA and the Deepstate. You see, it's not just these. I remember in the 60s and 70s, there was something called the Peace Corps. How many of you remember that? What were they? They were innocent kids who came here to so-called help out. And every year or every 6 months, they'd have big meetings here to exchange notes. And of course, there'd be the CIA observer sitting there and listening. And when they went back, all of them had to go for debriefing. What was that? Information gathering. For instance, one of the main cries then was, oh, everything is so steeped in corruption. It told them, if you want something done here, money, power, awards, recognition. The same thing everywhere. And these are the weapons they used to destroy us through our own people. Now, folks, next time I'll show you a little more about how things began working in this country way back in the 70s and 80s. See you next time.